On this week's episode of Where We Are, we'll take questions from you, the listener. We have some good ones on the docket, so let's get to it. You're listening to Where We Are.
Hello, Where We Are listeners. If you're a longtime fan of this podcast or you're just joining us for the first time today, we want to tell you more about our podcast platform called Spotify for Podcasters. We've been using this platform for over a year, and it's been easy to use and new features are added all the time. You can record and edit podcasts from your phone or computer. You don't need anything fancy, and you don't need previous podcast experience. When you hit publish, you will distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify if that's your kind of thing. And with Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. But here's the thing, you can earn money, but it's a free platform. There's no catch. If you're curious or want to see what it's all about, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Hello, you're listening to Where We Are. We are the Wheres. I'm Michael.
I'm Melissa.
And this podcast is brought to you by the That Sounds Fun Network. So glad to be a part of that great team over there. And Melissa, glad to be with you for this episode. Brief leg update. I got the clearance from the docs on Monday to put weight on my leg, and I'm hobbling around now on 2 feet as opposed to just one, and so I feel good about
I have
that.
3 toddlers in the house right now.
It really is.
You just shuffle along. It's very
just
sweet.
gotta shuffle along. But I'm starting to feel like I'm
turning a corner.
Which is good. Housekeeping items. Thanks for all the positive feedback on the Where We Are brand consolidation
With our Substack.
You go to whereweare.substack.com and check that out. Thank you also to everyone who's given such positive feedback on the book. I'm excited about it, and it's so good to hear from so many of you who are excited about it. Thank you for those who have pre-ordered. It really is. And I know it seems like, well, gosh, Michael, that book doesn't come out for 8 months. But publishers, booksellers take pre-orders as a sign of how excited people are for the book. And so appreciate you all. I appreciate those of you who have pre-ordered The Spirit of Our Politics, which I'm really proud of. Sent in the manuscript this week. Well, there will be proof editing, so we'll do another round. One thing I can announce, at least I think I can announce it, I will announce it here, is that I also got clearance this week to narrate the audiobook. So I'll be doing the audiobook. So I'm
reclaiming hope you didn't narrate. You had a narrator, but this time you're reading your words.
Yes, so that'll be fun. So those are some housekeeping items. Melissa, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. We have friends here this weekend with their babies. We've got a baby in the house again.
We do, and the baby wore our baby's bib at dinner, and it was just, I was getting nostalgic. I was thinking about our babies.
I know you're looking at me like, it's so nice to have a baby again. I was like, no way, my dude. My answer was, I can't wait for all of our friends to bring their babies to sit at our dinner table.
Yeah, that was pretty deft diplomatic maneuvering from you. We haven't done a listener's question episode in a while.
Yeah.
We sent out the flare, and we got some great questions back from
lots of good ones.
From so many of you, and so we'll just cover as many as we can. A mix of serious and fun, or just more personal, and we'll just get to them as we can. But Melissa, what do we have up first?
Let's do it. Okay, so there was an executive order last week made by President Biden regarding childcare. What are our thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, so this executive order is basically in lieu of major legislation. It's really clear. For those of you who will remember, when they made a decision to split Build Back Better into the infrastructure bill and then sort of social policy bill, and then child care was sort of, it didn't make the cut of what they could push for. And so, and then Republicans won the House. So it's really clear we're not going to get a federal child care bill this session. So the Biden administration did this executive order with what they could do with their authority. And, I'll be honest, there are like 50 different administrative directives. I think the most significant headline is, one of the things they're using is trying to direct resources funding that was approved under the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the semiconductor bill, trying to redirect those resources to support access to child care. But basically, for those that are affected by the executive order, it will generally help. They'll have access to funds, but this isn't a massive deal for the American people generally. It'll be a massive deal for the people who it touches and who are affected. I think we've talked about the Family Fun Pack, Matt Brunig's family policy proposal. And look, I think so much of a Democrats' child care policy is intentionally seems to be written to just make sure that stay-at-home parents don't get support. It is very much written with a workforce priority. And we've talked in the past. There was a New York Times article now maybe 12, 18 months ago, maybe even longer than that, where New York Times surveyed a bunch of academics, mostly economists, which is super telling about what family policy the Biden administration should most prioritize. And it was just stunning to see the assumptions that were embedded in academia generally and in policymaking circles about what pro-family policy is for. And I'll give you a hint. It's not to be pro-family. That it's a very much like an economy first. It's an economist mindset that many are bringing to these questions, not a family stability mindset, not a family flourishing mindset. And so I think, Melissa, that I do think childcare is an area where, yes, there are different ways to go about it. You could do block grants, whatever, but generally I think it's going to have to be a federal policy to meet the kind of need that's necessary.
Yep. The system is way too broken when it comes to the caregivers themselves not being able to make a decent wage for the kind of work that they're doing. And then the system is so expensive for parents. And so there's somebody in the middle making a ton of money. And so that needs to be fixed.
Yes. And so I think federal intervention is necessary. I have to say, my skepticism for our national politics, our federal institutions being able to responsibly deal with family policy is not increasing, to say the least. Mm-hmm. And so I'm concerned about the kinds of policies that would come out. But I would love to see some responsible, reasonable, open policies that give families the support that they need. I agree with you, Melissa. The situation is out of hand. It is unsustainable. I don't see why. I know there are a bunch of political reasons why there can't be a direct subsidy to parents to care for to help support child care as they see fit, whether it's subsidizing stay-at-home care or subsidizing institutional care or support for family caregivers. Like I don't like the idea of federal dollars being used to incentivize and therefore disincentivize some of the most personal sort of decisions that you make as a parent. And so that's my kind of that's my take on, I guess, childcare policy broadly. But this executive order, I think, a lot of positive, generally positive things. Again, I'll be honest, I haven't broken down each of the 50 sort of directives. But basically, that the headline is this is the Biden administration doing what it can within its authority in lieu of Congress acting.
Mm-hmm. So what is the most important SCOTUS case, so Supreme Court case, this term?
Yeah, so there's a lot. I mean,
yeah.
I think the one that's going to get the most attention is this decision on affirmative action and racial quotas in higher ed. That's going to be a significant case. There are also, though, some. So that's Students for Fair Admissions versus University of North Carolina and versus the President Fellows of Harvard. Those are significant cases. Some important criminal justice cases, including involving those on death row and capital punishment cases. I think those are going to be significant. And then there are these like free speech kinds of these free speech cases that I think are going to be grab some headlines as well. But first, I'd say the affirmative action in higher ed is going to be definitely, maybe not in terms of long-term import, although I think it could be very sort of consequential. It's also going to be significant politically. Politically, it'll be for sure the most significant case in terms of the law. It's a loaded docket. There's also some labor cases. There's this Glacier Northwest versus the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, and so a union case. There's a case about worker compensation and overtime, and so yeah. But I think there's a clear cut answer. Yeah.
The one that popped into my head immediately when I saw this question, because I watched it last month. Arguments were heard last month, so in February, and it's Gonzalez versus Google. So Google, the tech giant. So the Gonzalez family sued Google, which owns YouTube, in 2016, alleging that the tech giant aided and abetted ISIS in violation of federal anti-terrorism statutes by recommending videos posted by the terror group to users. And so obviously those arguments have been heard. And so they're trying to change something with Section 230 in the Communications Decency Act. And so what I've been reading is that it could change the internet and how the internet works if the Supreme Court rules in favor of the Gonzalez family. So I think that one's pretty significant. Could possibly be.
Yeah. All right, let's see what's next.
Yep. So next, so when do we expect the pendulum or the extremism pendulum to swing in Florida?
Look, I think it remains to be seen how DeSantis is going to perform on the national stage, but I think as a state politician, he's dominant in Florida. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't just come down to him. They now have two Republicans in the United States Senate too, so they're pretty dominant in the state. I don't know if we can go into a full diagnosis of the problems Democrats face in the state, but I think top of the list has to be the bleeding they're doing among Latino voters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And until that gets addressed, then I don't think I think Florida is a pretty solidly red state. I mean, when I was on the Obama campaign in 2008, it was one of the top tier battleground states, and we won Florida in 2008. Obama, once Obama was off the stage, then yeah, it's sort of fallen off of that sort of competitive status.
I'm Mo Rocca, and I'm excited to announce Season 4 of my podcast, Mobituaries. I've got a whole new bunch of stories to share with you about the most fascinating people and things who are no longer with us. From famous figures who died on the very same day, to the things I wish would die, like buffets. All that and much more. Listen to Mobituaries with Mo Rocca wherever you get your podcasts.
Get out of the trenches of tedious tasks like managing order fulfillment and start growing your business with ShipStation. They'll help increase profitability by automating your workflow with their simple, easy-to-use dashboard. With it, you can pretty much do everything you need to quickly and easily. Update order information, print labels, compare rates, optimize shipments, and even set up automatic delivery notifications. And it doesn't matter where you sell. Amazon, Etsy, eBay, Shopify, ShipStation can integrate pretty much anywhere online. Another great thing about ShipStation? They can help reduce costs with industry-leading discounted rates from some of the biggest mail carriers. You might even be able to get up to 89% off USPS and UPS rates. So, make this year your most profitable one yet. Sign up for your free 30-day trial at ShipStation.com and use the code Spotify. That's ShipStation.com with the code Spotify.
The next question is, who should Christians read for political discipleship? This can be either classics or contemporary writers.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and this is, something of a self-serving answer, but it is just like my point of view, which is, the book. I wrote The Spirit of Our Politics because there's a reason why there aren't that many great books on this subject. There are books on Christian worldview. Mm-hmm. There are books on here's the agenda Christians ought to have. But
there's books that diagnose why American Christianity is the way it is.
Yep. What
is the relationship between Christianity and politics? There's a bunch of books on that.
Right. But I'm hoping The Spirit of Our Politics, Spiritual Formation and the Renovation of Public Life, my book that will be out in January, will be contributive in this space. I will say, Professor Vince Bacote's The Political Disciple is a very worthwhile, important book in the space. Would recommend it. And then it's more, you kind of have to construct
exactly
from different resources, what this looks like. I mean, I don't want to preempt myself here, but, my book draws on the work of Dallas Willard for a reason, which is I didn't see that many great resources on political discipleship. So one of the bridges that I thought had to be built was bridging the spiritual formation, the discipleship sort of genre, and those resources with those of politics, political theology, that kind of thing. But, can't go wrong reading Bonhoeffer, can't go wrong reading C.S. Lewis, can't go wrong reading Howard Thurman. But the question uses specific language, and again, with the exception of my friend Vince Bacote's wonderful book, Oh, and I should, Caitlin Chess has a wonderful book that I was honored to write the foreword for, The Liturgy of Politics. I was very excited. I actually met Caitlin in a hallway at a conference and told her how highly I thought of her work, and told her, and this was years ago, this was before Liturgy of Politics came out, told her I was working, told her I was planning to write this book about spiritual formation and politics. She told me about Liturgy of Politics. I told her, whatever I can do to help you. I think this is such an important thing. I'm so glad you're writing on it. And she asked me maybe a year later, she said, I recall that conversation. Would you consider writing the foreword? And the rest is history. Caitlin is now part of the Public Life Fellowship Program for CCPL and a good friend. So I'd also give a shout out to her book.
So next question is a big one, and we get asked this questions like this a lot. So happy to have this one. But how do you repair relationships that politics has caused to become estranged?
I'd love to hear what you have to say on this. I do write about this extensively in the book. It's a really tough thing. I have some thoughts, but Melissa,
Yes.
what would come first to mind for you?
Yeah, part of it is like, who can you control in any given situation? There's been an estrangement, whether it's from a friend or from a family member. Most likely it's family member with the use of the word estranged here. Is that you can't really control how other people react to any kind of reconciliation. Only you can really control how you react. And one of the sort of pitfalls or challenges that I see for a lot of people is that they kind of go into it still with a chip on their shoulder of I haven't done wrong, or I believe that, this person that, I become estranged from has a terrible worldview, or this particular politician they've supported, I think is anathema to any kind of human flourishing. If you hold views that strong, you often go into the conversations sort of revved up to become angry, which led to probably the fight or the series of fights or disagreements that you had that led to the estrangement in the first place. And so I think it's really important to sit and reflect on how will you actually approach this situation? How will you approach this person? Asking God to help you with whatever anger arises, help you to be slow to anger, help you to see the bigger picture, help you in the fruits of the Spirit when it comes to approaching this person again. And I think that's a start. But then I think it's also a place where it's kind of you have to be open with the other person of hey, I don't like where we've ended up and I want to restart the conversation again, but I need to know that, you're willing as well. Because I think also starting a conversation with somebody who's just not ready or willing, you're just going to end up in a bad place again, where you're just thinking ill of the person and not, leading, whatever forgiveness that you should be seeking, it might be difficult to bring that out again. So this is just generally what I see when it comes to the actual on the ground. What is it like to actually reapproach somebody you're estranged from because of political views? And the last thing, you've heard me say this a bunch of times, you've heard Michael say this a bunch of times, is about trying to hold your politics a little bit more lightly. When you're doing that, obviously I understand that there are certain situations in which there might be other stuff at play, but if it really is a disagreement on political issues, humility is going to go a long way if reconciliation is what you really seek.
Yeah, it's a good answer, Melissa. I mean, I think I'd just add, first, and this may not be the most helpful thing to say, but it's really hard to repair estranged relationships.
It really is.
And so you just want to be careful about where you're drawing lines
Yep.
in the sand.
Exactly. Because your line might be way further than the other person's, you know?
And so you want to be careful there. If the relationship is estranged, honesty and going back and saying, I made a mistake. This disagreement was not and should not have been as important enough to me to risk our relationship, and just being really direct in saying that. Because here's the thing. You can't just say, we're going to agree to disagree. Mm-hmm. Because if you have an estranged relationship over politics, you just have to understand that it's no longer about political disagreement. Mm-hmm. It's about a values judgment, a character judgment that the person feels you made against them, or that you feel that the person made against you. And so that has to be reconciled, or else, even if you get back on talking terms, like that unless that underlying sense of condemnation is addressed, mm-hmm. Then that's going to be a dark cloud over the relationship, even if there's at least like perfunctory communication. And so that's what I'd say. We do talk about this quite a bit, so it's a question that comes up, and hopefully that answer, to those of you who have heard us talk about this before, hopefully what we offered on this episode, I think, offers a couple different things to think about.
Yes. So next question. What GOP candidate do we wish would get into the race?
Well, look, I mean, so it's such a difficult question, because it's in an ideal world, who would you want the Republican nominee to be? Yeah. Like, is that the question? Is the question, who would you want to get in the race because they may not be your ideal, but they could win given like whatever political analysis you have? Or is it like who would you want to get in the race because you like them even though they don't have a chance of winning? And so
I feel like most of mine are that one.
Yeah, there are like a lot of Republicans I'd love to see run, and that I'd love to like consider supporting. It doesn't seem like a Republican electorate is dispositioned towards them. I think it should be pretty. I like Tim Scott more than I like other Republicans currently running for the nomination. I'm glad he's running. I think so highly of former Governor Bill Haslam.
I knew it. I knew that was going to be your answer.
Of Tennessee. And John Kasich would, but those are all, those folks are for different, different questions, like I'd like, it's so complicated because then you talk about these candidates getting in. Well, what if they draw 10% of the vote and it just leads to someone who isn't as good of a candidate winning? And so, but those are some of the people I'd like to see in. I've said before on this show, and this idea is only, I'm only more convinced of this as I've watched her. Katie Britt, new senator from Alabama. She's young. I'm telling y'all, I just want to put because oftentimes with Melissa, I'll say things and they happen, but I have no proof. So I'm just putting the flag in the ground. Katie Britt could be a VP running mate as early as 2024 if the running mate is someone with national security credentials already. If the top of the ticket is someone with national security credentials already, but she's going to be running for national office down the road. One more name to throw in the mix: Chris Sununu, New Hampshire, wildly popular.
Yeah, he really is popular.
Disagree with him on some on some stuff, like everybody. But Sununu would be an interesting candidate in the race. Rubio has had a tough go. He's had a really tough go, but I don't think I've said this on this podcast before. I think I said it on Faith when I did Faith 2020, the podcast I did walking folks through the 2020 election. So much of the hate against Rubio is, look, he's made mistakes. He's taken positions I don't agree with. So much of the hate towards Rubio is a direct result of millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars being spent against Rubio because Democrats were terrified of him.
Yes.
And people just take this stuff as if,
this was inherent.
This was inherent. Or like the focus on Rubio was just like a rational, unbiased sort of unbiased observer sort of singling out the worst Republicans, whatever. No, people were terrified of him. Like the crooked media guys, my old White House colleagues, they went after him ruthlessly. Mm-hmm. And it was because they were terrified of him, terrified of a Republican Party that was led by, 2012, circa 2012 Rubio.
Yeah. It
does remind me, though, of something I want to go back to, which is kind of a current event thing. I meant to raise on the SCOTUS stuff, which is like a similar... This is going to be maybe like a... things can be true and have merit to them and also be profoundly coordinated propaganda campaigns. And what we've seen regarding the Supreme Court over the last couple of weeks is one of those things, which is, look, like it's very, and I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying there's nothing to criticize in some of what's come out around Justice Thomas, and now there are all these follow-up campaigns about other justices. I'm not saying there aren't discrete issues there that deserve inquiry and question and opposite, whatever. What I don't want you to be fooled by is the idea that this is all happening in an environment in which the Supreme Court is 6-3 conservative, and progressive, moneyed organizations, they either see a decade of conservative decisions out of the Supreme Court, or they get people so upset with the Supreme Court and get people to think that reform, like expanding the court or impeaching and getting rid of certain justices, is necessary. Without those things happening, there are certain groups who just know their policies aren't going to move through the Supreme Court, that they aren't going to get the decisions that they're looking for. And so they're doing the best they can with the situation they have. And so I just want, again, it's not, don't believe anything you see, but don't believe everything you see, and don't and don't sort of like allow yourself to be so easily ginned up by these like social media campaigns and these stories. Like there's a reason why stories are getting published in like the Guardian and in these outlets where where these reporters can get worked. So that's all I'm gonna say there. I don't know if maybe there will be some questions on that, but it is something that's been stunning to me as someone who's been a political operative, to see it playing out and just to see the incredulous sort of response from folks who are like, "Wow, the Supreme Court really is a corrupt institution." Well, make that argument, but maybe don't make it just on the basis of the fact that there's clearly a coordinated campaign going on to make you make that argument. So Moving on.
I do have an answer to this question of a GOP candidate. I wish
yeah,
would get into the
good.
race. I feel like no one ever really talks about him, and I'm kind of like, he seems like he's been doing a great job. He seems to get really positive news stories nationally, fairly often. But Governor Spencer Cox of Utah, like, throw a person like him into the race.
Great guy.
Yeah.
Great guy. And his lieutenant governor seems great too. She had to temporarily take the governor. Cox had some kind of procedure, and so the lieutenant governor became governor for 4 hours. And it was just like a very wholesome. The whole situation in Utah just seems so healthy and so wholesome, and like the Democrats and Republicans kind of like get along and don't hate each other, and it's just like, yeah, I could see the Spencer Cox recommendation for sure.
Yeah. So our next question, how should Christians respond to Republicans' focus on trans and gender nonconforming people in multiple states?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that there are ways in which the political process turn issues like this into blunt instruments and to make it so the humanity of people is lost. Mm-hmm. Now, look, my view is that this is operating on multiple levels. Mm-hmm. There is clearly a set of ideological markers, positions that the left wants to use this issue. Some on the left want to use this issue to advance. And so I'm not someone who thinks like these discussions can't be or shouldn't be had, that nothing can be contested, that as long as no one is forcing, like there's all this rhetoric. Well, what does it matter to you? Well, there are all of these ways of how society functions that are embedded in how this argument plays out, and so you just need to be attentive to those things. What I will say is we've also seen play out before a deep antagonism to individuals seem to be, quote unquote, working politically until it doesn't. And it was wrong in the first place. So it was wrong to ignore and even use the gay community as a punching bag during the AIDS epidemic. So they were either ignored or sort of made into a pariah. It was wrong to do that substantively. I will say politically, like those things come home to roost. Like a political approach of disgust only works, again, quote unquote, works for so long, but that wears out. So all I'm saying is that if Republicans want to push back in any way, and especially for Christians to be a part of that, in some of these discussions, both as a matter of Christian duty and respect for the person, and also, and then secondly, out of the fact that we share a community together, and we are to go back to basics. Politics is an essential form in which we are called to love our neighbor. So maybe the simplest way that I could say this is, if your approach to this issue isn't one in which you could say with good conscience, my approach is oriented toward the good of my neighbor, then your approach isn't Christian. And there was assemblyman, there was some official down in Florida who was presiding over a committee, I believe it was Florida, who was presiding over a hearing on these issues. And he didn't just state a policy position. He didn't state a positive argument about what the law should be. He used language that was akin to some of the worst, most dehumanizing political movements that we've seen in the last century. And he used them relating to transgender folks. And Christians need to just be very clear to not align themselves with that language, and to actually say that is not okay. And what I worry about is because some Christians are concerned about where the policy and where the culture is going on some of these questions, that they will be quiet and even get like a little emotional thrill, a sort of resentment-filled thrill when politicians speak about transgender folks in a dehumanizing way. And that has to be resisted first and foremost. And if you can't participate in this discussion, if you can't think about these issues without feeling that sense of antagonism, then I'd urge you to sit it out. I'd urge you to cede the issue to those who can approach it respecting the dignity of everybody involved. And so, look, I think, I mean, just to wrap up my thoughts on it, like self-evidently, there is not one Christian approach to this issue. I have concerns about some of the ideological work that's being done that I don't think is intrinsic to respecting trans and gender nonconforming folks. And I think those discussions have to be had. But I've never been and will hopefully never be a participant in debates that are seeking to dehumanize folks.
Good word. The next question. What's going to happen with the debt ceiling? Are we going to default?
I don't think so.
I don't think. I mean, the United States has never actually seriously defaulted on purpose, and the kind of default that we would have. And again, this default would happen sometime around June, which would be when we couldn't pay our bills any longer because the debt ceiling wouldn't be raised in enough time. The type of default that we would face would be quite catastrophic economically. And so the machinations before all of that, obviously Biden has presented his budget, and McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, has now gotten a House budget together. And I think that this idea that Biden and McCarthy aren't talking right now is just, both of the sides able to say that, I'm not budging, I'm not capitulating, I'm not compromising on these ideas, stances, values, whatever, that I have. But, they will start talking, fairly soon. We're almost at the very end of April. And again, we don't have like an exact day for the default because of just how the complex the United States debt system is. But we're going to be heading into May, and I think we're finally going to actually see some negotiations happening. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bunch closed door right now that is just not being revealed to the media, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, right. So if Barack Obama would have lost re-election in 2012, then I would think default is much more likely. But Republicans weren't rewarded for the escapades, a little over a decade ago. And so I don't think they're going to want to try that again. I also don't think the Biden administration can afford to be viewed as irresponsible or holdouts here. We talked in the morning for the Morning Five this week. The House did pass a debt ceiling bill, and so the House is on record passing a bill that would raise the debt ceiling, and so it makes it hard for Biden to say how unreasonable Republicans are. Now he will argue that the cuts that they made, how they got to that, aren't something he could accept. I don't think this is like McCarthy's final offer, but it does strengthen Republicans' hand. But I don't think we're going to see. I don't think we're going to see a default. Now look, but this is why we had to talk so much about McCarthy's struggle to be elected as Speaker, which is, part of the negotiations there were the furthest right wing of the Republican Party trying to box McCarthy in so that he can't bring something to a vote unless the majority of Republicans support it. And I'm not recalling all the details now, but I believe they try to set the bar even higher than that, than a majority of the caucus. And so we'll see if speaking of chickens coming home to roost, if we see the ramifications of what McCarthy had to do to become Speaker, how much those box him in. But I think that they'll find a way through it. But ask us again in late May. I mean, to Melissa's point, Melissa, I do agree. Like the engagement will escalate, but one thing about is it's rare that they're able to come to an agreement without the pressure of the deadline directly upon them. So I think engagement will increase, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't raise the debt ceiling until 48 hours, 72 hours out.
Yeah.
Which is so dangerous just in itself, like there's you don't want to be going up. You don't want to be 48, 72 hours from defaulting when you got China breathing down your neck and you have Ukraine depending on the American government being able to deliver, when you have the EU losing confidence in America. Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have nations around the world that are considering whether the Chinese currency is more reliable and whether they switch over. And so you just don't want to be playing games with the U.S. economy and the dollar right now. And so if we had statesmen in Congress, or at least if we had enough statesmen and stateswomen, we'd have a deal now or in early May. We've seen a different track record as of late.
Yeah, and the only other thing that I'll say towards this before we move on is that our credit rating could get downgraded by S&P. It was downgraded in 2011. If anybody remembers, for the very first time ever, the United States, like the most powerful economy in the world, its sovereign debt was downgraded by S&P. And it had ramifications, especially for, again, global standing, confidence in the United States. Like, it affects all that sort of stuff. But part of what I've been thinking through this whole debt ceiling thing is that inflation continues to be quite sticky and the labor market continues to be quite strong, meaning that those two things are competing against one another. And this talk of recession, are we already slightly in a recession? Or we have the Goldilocks scenario where we're skating, around it, but we won't quite have a recession. A lot of economists think that a lot more people need to be laid off, that the labor market needs to take a hit so that we can finally get rid of this inflation, which they believe is far more damaging than people losing jobs. And a good part of me wonders if some games might be played with downgrade of debt so that the United States economy takes a little bit of a hit, so that the labor market's weakened, so that we can finally get rid of the inflation. I've been thinking about that lately, about what Biden's economic team is thinking and stuff like that.
That would be like an act of hubris.
No, it would be a complete act of hubris. But honestly, economists, well,
if you're looking for hubris, that's not the worst place to look.
Yeah, okay.
I think we've covered enough of the serious topics.
Let's move on. Let's move to some of the personal.
Yeah, exactly. Melissa, what do you have any hobbies sort of on the horizon? Any sort of anything you'd like to pick up maybe in the rest of 2023?
So I have to tell you, even when I was little, like I'm talking like 8 years old, people would be like, "What's your hobby?" I'd always struggle and scramble to say something because I've never been a hobbyist. I've never once been a hobbyist.
Which is weird because, not to do Enneagram talk, but fives are, I think, like, wouldn't a five be the kind of person who would like collect stamps?
I think there are certain fives for sure, but
certainly not you.
The type of knowledge that I thirst isn't collectible. Sorry. Or buildable.
The kind of knowledge I thirst isn't collectible. Okay, Rumi. All right.
What's something you've learned?
Wait, no, I'm going to press you on this.
What?
I'm going to press you on this. Okay. If you were going to pursue a hobby, what would it be? Do you like the idea of a hobby, even if you want to do it yourself? What about like learning a language?
Oh, I'm really bad at learning languages. I know that you're just providing an example here, but yeah, I mean, if my brain was the type of brain that wanted to suck in languages, yeah, I would be a polyglot. Like I would want to know 10 languages for absolute certain. Maybe I'll make Italy my hobby. Italy kind of already is my hobby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I have a hobby. There we go.
All right. Melissa, what's something we've learned from our kids recently? The person noted something small, not profound.
Yeah, profundity from our children. Yeah.
Saoirse walked me through the tadpole frog life cycle.
Oh, yeah.
And I found that to be very enlightening, and the way that she became very professorial as she pointed through this sort of chart that she made at school. I did feel like I was getting schooled, so that's something. But what about you? Anything?
It's always profound for me. I mean, I'm trying to think of something like small. If like Saoirse's spit out a fact or something like kind of like the tadpoles, and like nothing is really striking me. No.
Yeah.
I don't have anything.
On an airplane, aisle or window?
Okay, if it's a 2-seater aisle, window. If it's 3-seater, I'd prefer to be aisle. And when I'm with you, I would love to be aisle, but I always give you the aisle.
That's very nice. I prefer aisle because it's easier to work on a computer in the aisle. You can, obviously, if the middle seat is empty, it's ideal because you don't have any restriction on either side of you. But if you're on the window and there's someone in the middle and it's someone who's not giving you a lot of space, then you kind of lose the flight work-wise. And so I always get aisle when I can. Melissa, I love this question.
Which president would we want as a roommate?
Which president has a roommate? Although I'm thinking I wouldn't want you to have any of the presidents as a roommate.
Okay.
But let's just
really
go.
Need a female president, Michael.
Well, this is why. This is the main reason why
for this question,
so that you could
I can be a roomie with that
hypothetically.
Yeah. I I mean, I think I have a couple answers. George W. Bush. He seems like he'd probably be a cute roommate.
Yeah. Before he got sober or after?
Oh, after. And then I'd say Jimmy Carter would probably be an excellent roommate.
Oh, that's
know?
a great
Like,
answer.
The ideal roommate. So my ultimate answer is Jimmy Carter, but I think George W. Bush in his painting period, yes.
Yeah. Yes! George W. Bush in his painting period.
Post-presidency painting period.
Yeah. Oh, man, it's a good question. I mean, right, so many of our presidents have a unique psychological profile.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
It's a great question because it's like, oh, man. I don't know, like Gerald Ford. You know, I think Carter's a great answer. I mean, Lincoln put up with Mary Todd's moods, so I'm sure he could put up with mine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a very difficult question.
Yes, definitely.
I'm interested. This is a question in particular. I'm interested in listener answers too, and we need a reason why. You can't just say. So yeah, Melissa, our favorite children's book.
Well, my personal favorite is Corduroy. It has been since I was little. I love Corduroy so much. I gift that to people all the time if I find out that they don't have it for like their baby shower, or their child, whatever. But a couple that I've liked since having kids, one would be Ellie Holcomb's Who Sang the First Song. That book, Michael, every time I pick it up, I've now probably read it about 40 times. At the end, I cry. I just cry. That book makes me cry because I've always said since Saoirse was born that these kids, she's not ours, Laurie isn't ours. Like they belong to God, and like that book just reminds me of that. And so I really have loved that book. I had no idea if somebody gifted it to us for Saoirse, and so I didn't know it existed until somebody gifted it to us. We've both really enjoyed Candle Walk, which is a bedtime liturgy.
The best. I love Candle Walk so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Candle Walk is a great book if you ever want bedtime liturgy for your kids. I'm trying to think. Oh, The Book with No Pictures is really funny. And then there's a couple of really funny ones. One is called Barnacle is Bored and Plankton is Pushy. They're the only two books that have been made in this way, but Barnacle is Bored and Plankton is Pushy are legitimately funny books. I read them to my nieces when they were little. And so my nieces gave our girls those books, and so now I love reading it to our girls as well.
Yeah. I love the Pout Pout Fish.
Oh, yeah, you love the Pout Pout Fish.
I love the Pout Pout Fish. Pout Pout Fish is great. You know, the kids haven't really hopped onto it yet, but I think they will. I think Saoirse will this Christmas. I love the Polar Express.
You do, yes.
I love Anansi.
Oh, yeah, Nancy. Yeah, you've always loved Anansi the Spider. It's a great story. Saoirse's really liked that one.
The Seven Brothers.
Snowy Day.
Snowy Day is fantastic.
You love Snowy Day. I mean, I love it too. There's also on Amazon Prime, they animated Snowy Day into like a 1 hour like Christmas special. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So check that out.
Yeah. But yeah, I think those are some of the top ones.
Yeah.
Melissa, I think we should wrap up the episode.
Yeah.
We're just about to hit an hour. We have a few more questions. We'll save them for the next listener episode that we have. But thank you again for great questions, and always love doing these because we have such a great audience. But I think that's it for this episode. We'll, as always, be with you for the morning 5 throughout the week, and we'll be back with where we are next week. Until then,
bye.
the end of the weekend, but I still wanna turn up. Yeah, I still wanna